Well, I just want to thank Sissi Benjira for the transition ritual we just did, and to be grateful to be here on the tapi, which I sit today. Rituals of regeneration. I think today I wanted to really talk about how rituals. Yeah, so the transition ritual that you just heard, Benji and I yesterday spoke about how we would transition, and how ritual is a relational experience, and I could still feel my heart beating because what you were listening to is the beats of a woman beating a slit drum made from a tree. And so your feet are on the earth, you're on an island, and you're listening to this beat, and it's coming from a woman. And that woman is an elder, a matriarchal leader in my village, and that has been passed down to her since before memory. And I recorded that particular ritual during a funeral. And so that was to mark the end of something. And I learned in that time that the end of things is the new renewal, the beginning of new things. And so this lecture today, I'm not sure if it's really a lecture, I'm an artist, but I would like to put honor to the idea of rituals and ideas of the human and the non-human, and thinking about these ideas as more like experiments and being open to this idea of what will happen. Things that aren't fixed, but things that are fluid. So thank you. From one archipelago to another, we have arrived here. So this slide here, it's just going to be a bit of a journey, talking about ritual of the human, non-human. I will talk about what has influenced me, and I suppose to talk about the artworks as products of these ideas, right? And these ideas that come from ritual. I'd like to use the word ritual, not practice, as an artist. Because actually the first 9 years of my life was in a village. And then I went on to learn in education, school, Western education, and even went on to art school, which is Western art. And so after learning all the movements of the Western art, as someone indigenous, someone of an island, I had to do a lot of unlearning of what I had learnt, because what doesn't sit right up here was fighting what was in here, embodied knowledge that you hear in the beats. So these beats inform my collective experience, my individual experience, even to this day, this moment right now. But we'll come back to those. So the first slide is actually, some of you will recognize Picasso, upside down. This is Picasso, swimmer, rotated at 90 degrees and flipped horizontally. And of course you will recognize the Chinese character for water. But this is actually a screenshot of a page from a thesis from a very good filmmaker, Iranian filmmaker called Mahmoud Yektaparist. And he made some very good films and influenced me in my unlearning and relearning. And I'd like to read this, which will set the tone about rhythmic and ritual and regeneration. So the idea as rhythmic vitality is an experimental work. The idea is the main protagonist. It blows the breath of life into the body of the work and it becomes its soul. Something that is there all the time but is not necessarily pronounced. Vital but not noticeable. An incorporeal entity that might not make sense but create strong sensation. A presence that does not represent. As such, it cannot really be developed. Therefore, it must be lived with, and like many other organic things, it's not always fun to have around. Sometimes it is a support that makes hardship pass without serious damage, and at other times it is a nasty thorn in the prick that pricks the ascending balloon of the joyful moments. An idea in this sense is primarily a formal idea. Quite a lot of thought must have been given to the concepts and contents of what one wants to say, and at the same time this is being done, one can hope for the real idea, which is how one wants to say it. Oh, next slide. So this is a work called Reclamation, and actually it gives an example of like the organic and the non-organic, so or the human impact, and it's about taking away the white gallery space. Art Space Sydney is right near the water in Sydney Harbour, and actually if you dig deeper into that floor you'll hit the water, and I think there's similarities here with the waterways, how close we are in relationship to water. And when I heard the sounds of the beats that you heard before, I imagined this work, and actually the center here in the X, no, this one here, the diamond is actually the center of the drum. This is the point where my elder in my village is hitting that point. And this symbolizes female and male authority in the village. But for us it's a formal language, it's a sign to say we are still here. And the idea that came when I was listening, for somehow I thought that we are in an era of reclamation. And this is the kind of sand that is used for reclaiming land, for filling up. It's unfertile, there's dust, it's not very pleasant after 4 weeks. Things start to live and breathe, it gets hot. So it's a real living space in there. And this cane was harvested from our jungle. And it has a lot of water content in it. And so it actually took the process of harvesting this cane is very much like harvesting banana, taro, sweet potato. And so in the process of doing it, we were actually harvesting our food. But as I was making the work with my cousins, it was an entirely new experience. So in a way, this is a formal idea, but it's in a new space. This one is called Reki. And the idea was to take the cane and cast it in bronze. There's something really interesting about the number 3, in cultures around the world. Religious icons as well. But for here, we wanted to replace this idea of the fixed idea of spirituality. And this one is called nakas. And this is a formal representation without any color, but just the lines. This is our tribe. Oh my gosh, I'm like moving my computer, not this. Sorry. Yeah. Paraha, again, the drum. Reki, the flying fox. And Nakas, the tribe. But I wanted to, before I show a work that I did around, actually, every October, there's a full moon in Oceania, in my part of the Pacific, where a ritual takes place, and I will call it a moon ritual. It's when, at this point in time, the coral releases all of its sperm and all of its egg, and it rises to the surface, and it floats across. And this is supposed to be the time when there's less predators out there, less sharks, less fish. And this is the time where when it's at night and they rise to the surface, they do their thing, and then they fall, and then they grow. And this is something that happens all the time. You know, it's something our ancestors have been witnessing since, I'll say it, time immemorial. We cannot put a time frame on it. And I'll just show the footage that I have of that work. It's essentially creating islands. I'll just press play. Yeah, so the sound is done by Michael Toisuta. He's an Indonesian composer. And so we were talking about how this is a phenomena that actually goes all the way up to Indonesia and comes back along that ring of fire. And what's very interesting is that in this age of drying up coral reef and how much impact it's happening to the oceans, is that actually every full moon in October, the Earth says, no, I'm going to actually regenerate, no matter what happens, you know. And we witnessed that. And I thought it was changed my thinking around how we should view and work with nature and learn from nature. And so this is an island, off an island where I live, and all of the islands have coral reefs that surround and protect the ecosystem. And so this Dengung Hyena is a beautiful homage to that ritual that takes place. And I wanted to sort of quote, and this is the point where I realized how there are other artists out there, actually. This might be someone that you know very well, but this is a work that is less talked about. Is Namjoon Paik. Is well known for his other works, but this is in Guadalcanal. Does anyone know where Guadalcanal is? Yeah, cool one. It's in the Solomon Islands, and Namjoon Paik actually collaborated with Charlotte Moorman a lot, and yet in this work he made an anti-documentary about it. And I'll just read here. Guadalcanal Requiem mixes documentary footage from World War II, Guadalcanal campaign, with 1970s when actually Namjoon Paik went there and filmed with Charlotte. Both types of footage are defamiliarized so that they diverge from the viewer's expectations. This estrangement happens in two ways. One is the manipulation of time. And time is distorted or manipulated through this video in a number of ways. Basically, it's hard to show without you understanding, but he basically reverses time. And for those of you who don't know, that Guadalcanal is actually the site of World War II between Japan and the Americans. And in a way, I found this very interesting, that an artist came and wanted to do some kind of reparation around that involvement of these countries there. I think there's an excerpt I can show. So this is a piece of that footage online we were able to find. It actually cuts out the sound at this point. I'm not sure why. But you can see that this is the drum, the same drum that I was talking about earlier in that first ritual, is the same kind of slit drum that my aunties use. Right, so Namjoon Paik and Dengung Hyena, and the idea of experimental art for me. I'll do another quote from Mahmoud, who's a great inspiration to me actually, where he says that creating is a political activity because it messes with smooth operations. It doesn't cooperate, it disobeys and surpasses the personal, or understands it as collective and political. It does away with the main component of the artwork of the master, the dispensable individual concern. The untrammeled painters of the ancient China were not individualists, but rather they had transcended all individual concern by becoming one with the way, the Tao. As such, they were not concerned with the risks of becoming the target of kings and feudal lords' wrath. They refused to get established. Inspired by the same non-humanist philosophies, I try to remain a minor artist, to create work that throws at the universe ghost agents who hunt sweet dreams of those who are addicted to the sounds and images of the masters. So I feel that with the experimental part of my work, in a way I was kind of unlearning this idea of the Enlightenment that I was taught. So for many Indigenous people in the Pacific, the first things that you will learn about your people is that they are primitive artists. And I had to actually do these courses in primitive art. And for me, the idea around language was really jarring to me. And so the idea that contemporary art and experimental art, it offers more openings and more portals into this idea around ritual. Something that is ancient, something that most cultures and people have, is the idea of ritual, of practicing or doing things over and over again. But every time you do them is something new. And in a way, with the coral spawning, it's been the greatest lesson for me. So these ideas that have informed me, I'm going to bring attention to another artist who's been a great coordinate for me. His name is John Poulet. And, again, I'm using the wrong. So John Poulet wrote this book, The Shark That Ate the Sun. And it's one of his early books. John Poulet is from Niue, an island in Oceania. And a lot of the books and literature that we read are written about us. When I say us, I mean islanders, people from the islands. And yet, a painter who says, "My heart and my thoughts were always on Niue. But here I was living in Aotearoa, which is the name for New Zealand, on someone else's land. Writing helped change me. Painting helped change me. I went back to Niue as often as I could, and I'd weed and clear the graves of my family and friends' families. It was a way of saying, I'm back. We go home to Niue with our Nikes and our jeans, and we think we know things. But the local people just think we're stupid. They know where all the trees are and the pathways and where the mythologies and the stories live." So this is his first novel, actually. And when I read it, it really made me think about what was truth and what was myth. But actually more about the imagination and the stories they hold. I have one of his short legends. He writes a legend in there, many of them. But I think what I'll do is we found a video of him, which is kind of rare. I'll let him speak for himself. It's a good story.
Sunday, the people were all at church. Their voices could be heard all morning praising anything the pastor pointed to, because what he said was holy was holy. Way up in the tree lived 2 ants. They were busy collecting sweet food for the nest when the first ant said to the other, "I have seen so many sacks of sugar carried into that shop down there of lingies that if I could get 1 sack, our nest would not have to work so hard to be fed." "Okay," said the other ant. "How are you going to do that?" "It is impossible to get from this tree to the ground. It will take at least a year, and to the door of the shop would take 2 years. How do you propose to carry a sack of sugar on your back to the top here?" "Easy. I will turn into a man. I won't take long. See ya." The ant turned into a tall, black, handsome man, and wasted no time getting down the tree to the ground and straight to the shop while the owners were at church. He was black as the night. Black, black, black. He saw the bags of sugar weigh at the back of the shop. He could not help but taste the little wrapped things on the shelves. He tasted this and that, ate soap, yuck, spat it out, tried toothpaste, and he vomited. He tried to understand the lettering on the packets. He hauled a bag of sugar onto his back and was on his way out when two men blocked the entrance. While they held him down, the people gathered around. One man said, "I have never seen a man so black. Uli, I've seen men from Papua New Guinea, but this man is black, black." While others said, "Anyway, where is he from? We have never seen him on the island before. Was there a shipwreck while we were in church?" "Who are you?" the people demanded, angry at his sin of stealing, but calmed down as the mystery evolved. The black man said, "I am an ant." They laughed, except the old ones who backed away in fear. A black man carrying a sack of sugar who says he is an ant has to be a spirit, a hungry one at that. "He must be mad. Let's take him to jail." The jail was situated in the capital overlooking the harbour. It was dusk and the flying foxes were on their way home. Full moon, ships in the ocean. The black man listened to the language of his jailers who poked him with sticks. When their voices became nothing in the bush, the black man turned into an ant and sneaked under the door. "I can see my tree, but how am I going to get there? It will take me years." A sound passed over the ant's head and pushed him into an old tin corned beef. The ant looked up, met the last group of peka flying home, changed himself into a peka and joined the group. The ant saw his tree and flew towards it. On the ground, a young boy was out hunting and threw a stone so hard and fast that it hit the peka. The peka clawed at the air and the moon fell away from his eyes. The peka fell at the base of the tree. The boy ran over, a dog barking at his feet. "I swear the peka landed right here, not far from the umu pit." "No," he shrugged his shoulders and walked away. But way, way down between the sharp blades of grass, a wounded ant changed into a black man, climbed the tree and became himself again, an ant. The other ant said, "Did you get the sugar?"
I just wanted to say that is one of his many legends. There are many legends, and I'm just wondering, I've lost complete track of time. How much time do I have left? Because there might be one more legend that I read. Oh, you want to hear another legend? This is a good one. Let me find it. I think I've already given this one to the translator. You find it? Yeah. You just have to deal with my reading. Is there a bottle of water? I'm just very thirsty. Thank you. It's in this, I think some people would call it magical realism, but it's in these stories that there are real truths here. So the idea of sugar and the ant, thank you so much. They're very symbolic. There's very symbolic stories, and in many ways, the idea of islands, living on an island and living far away, there's many sort of symbolic ideas that people have about that. Romantic ones that people have written into history, but they're actually places of very real issues, like two ants struggling to get a sack of sugar. This is actually a practice that my sisters and brothers and kin do in Australia amongst artists, cross-disciplinary artists, as we read to each other. It's called Reading Oceania. Started by a late sister native island sister of mine from Tonga. And this is a practice that she began in a lounge room, reaching out, and we all were wanting to read, literature now. And we find stories from people, and we bring that to each other. So in homage to that practice, Sister Native and the Reading Oceania group, this is a kind of a method that I'm doing today in this lecture. It's not so much to talk about myself, but to talk about those around me. And in those stories, maybe you get some sense of idea of the region as we know it. So John Poulet wrote this story. It's from that book, The Shark That Ate the Sun. Chapter 31. He's going to hate me for reading these, but Tales of Life's Legends. Okay, legend 1. Okay, get comfortable. This is a bit long. When Tafa fell into the hole, the old man Afi said, God dug this with one push of a finger. The people of every village went along to see. They heard the sacred voice of Tafa. When the men threw rocks down, they did not hear the bottom, but Tafa's voice still came back. Because there is no place for spiritual hope no more, said Afi. That is why we hear his voice, but no sound when the rock is thrown down. He is dead, but his spirit lives. It is this spirit calling us to bring his body back to the light, to be buried under the sun. The men shuffled, the women back like children. The men thought women did not know such things, such as answers, let alone questions. One chief, he stepped forward, an old warrior from long ago. Payu. He wiped his forehead and at the sweat of his hand studied this hole. But why can we not hear the end of this hole? Everything has an end. It is dark like the sky at night. I say we let down a rope, and if any volunteer among the Fuata are brave enough to go down, let him step forward. The young men, about a dozen, were standing around, the elders in a semicircle. One or two breathed in deep, and the muscles on their arms and the youth of their chests made the girls giggle, while some drew confusion on the dry, dusty ground with their big toes. The elders turned around to face the pride and strength of the villagers. One youth, he raised his hand. It was Tamakau. The sun lived in his eyes. A fresh stream glittered around his lips. I will go down, he said, and in the name of the Lord and for our church, I will bring Tafa's body back to the real world. The elders, they all beamed with joy. Only Tamakau's mother rose up where she was sitting under the tea tree to protest. She was sitting with her mother and several cousins from the village Tafa came from. Tafa's sister was among those who sat under the tea tree. But before the mother could say a word, Piyu pushed Tamakau out to the front of the young men and made a speech. We have here a warrior, a young man made by God. For God and the church, he is ready to risk his life. All those agree, raise your hands. Of course all the men raised their hands, and Piyu felt confident that he still had a little mana left because the days were coming to an end when warrior played an important part in running the village affairs. These days, the church did the administering. Mana means spirit, by the way. Tamaka's mother walked right up to Pio and stood on his toes. She spoke, "He is my only son. What if he does not come back? I will not let him go." She grabbed hold of her son's arm. Tamaka, sensing his friends were laughing, stepped away from his mother. "I'm going down. Anyway, a rope will be tied around my waist." The mother knew it was no use to argue. She sat down between her mother and Tafa's sister. The old mother turned to her daughter. "God will bring you back, son. If he doesn't, we will all commit suicide." It was late afternoon. When enough vine was collected and tied together, old man Afi said it was long enough to reach Apollo. The sun burned the world. Flies harassed the people and followed the men around the compound. Tafa still called out. This time he was hungry and cried out for food. Fish, talo, crabs, bottle of beer. What an appetite, Pio, he thought to himself, as he was lowered down the baskets with the contents inside, and when the basket came back up, it was empty. Not bad, Pio thought. That is one hungry spirit, Tamaka said. As he took the first step down into the hole, Pio gave Tamaka his old torch. After a step down into the hole, a prayer was made. The vine was tied to a coconut tree nearby, and the other end to the waist of Tamaka. And down he went into the hole where the spirit of Tafa roamed. The men holding the vine kept in constant contact with Tamaka, calling out his name. Tamaka would not answer back. He went so far down that his voice could not be heard, nor the light be seen from the torch Pio purchased from the first shop on the island for $1, and the batteries that he left in the sun to recharge overnight. The elders started to fidget among themselves, and they were afraid of failure. And when the word got around to the women contemplating suicide, if Tamaka did not come back, they panicked and started pulling out their hair. Tamaka's mother, her mother, and a cousin were held down from jumping into the waves by some of the women who were against suicide. The elders decided to hold a council meeting, and the elders from every village were to attend to meet that afternoon around a hole. Even an English reporter happened to be in the capital. He came along with his camera and began taking snapshots of the men. The village and the women crying, Tamaka's mother and the hole, while the meeting went on. Two voices, those of Tafa and Tamaka, called out for food. Talo, fish, crabs, green cooked banana, and a transistor radio. Soon it seemed like the whole world turned up to now that famous hole in the Pacific. The airport had more than 10 flights a day come in and take off, bringing passengers from all over the globe to see that hole. Documentaries, religious investigations, interviews kept the government as well as the village elders busy. The tiny country appealed to the tourist trade as the prime spot to build hotels for the millions of people who have lost paradise or wanted to see one and were encouraged to visit the last resort. When uranium was discovered on the rock, the owners of the land as well as government officials sweated at the thought of money and were saying yes, yes, yes to the company that would supervise the project. TV was introduced. Each village had more than 2 hotels. The Sheraton was built over spiritual land, removing the bones that had been sleeping there for hundreds of years. They cleared away the middens, the burial caves, and built a hotel to sleep 200 people and employed only Europeans. The capital looks like the streets in New York, said the Frenchman. That was a really bad accent, by the way. Who had an appointment with the head of government that hot day. In his pocket, a fat checkbook stood up to the sun. and it shined on it. He was planning to build a port before the year 2020. And more hotels, hotels, hotels. That is all you see along the coast. Hotels, hotels, hotels. American warships watched from the harbour. Roads were rebuilt. And now everywhere on the island, through the forest and over the ancient sites. Everybody had forgotten about the whole and cared only where the long black tail of Western civilization, steaming in the hot Pacific sun, would lead them. So that was Legend 1 of John Poulet. I think I'll stop here for discussion, if people would like to have a discussion. I think a lot of people have fallen asleep. It was important for me, I think, to honour and read the people that I think have given me inspiration, and I want to say thank you to X for bringing me here and your wonderful team. Thank you. Thank you, Beju.
我们还有短 We still got some time for Q&A. If people want to ask a question or just have comment, you can just raise your hand. Okay, if there's no more comments, we can. Yeah? Okay. Green first.
Thank you for sharing your work with us. I guess I wanted to ask a little bit if you could talk more about how you find making work in the contemporary art world in conversation with your with weaving in your life, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, how do you know how far to go, and how much to share of the things that have happened to you or the things that have happened to your family? When do you pull back? Thanks.
There was a work that I made called Barawana, Shell Money, and it's actually a work that suspends from the ceiling, and it can go for 50 meters, but it actually twirls around like a spiral in a coil. And it's made of hundreds, sometimes thousands of individual made ceramic rings. And when I made that, it went into a white gallery space, and then I went back to my village and showed photos of this installation, and said to my aunties and uncles, who live very traditional lives, and they were like, "Oh wow, this is amazing! That's our Barawana, that's our currency. You've made it a monument." And so it's always part of like creating something new is what excites I think the people in my village, because the work reclamation and the Dengung Hayana is all made together collectively. And it's, I mean, I am an individual, right? I have an idea, and I was talking earlier about how an idea is generated. And actually, sometimes it's the rituals. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. It's the doing of it. And that's what happens. And I think if it's fun and exciting and inclusive, and it's something to talk about, then there is no limits. There's nowhere to pull back. It's just keep going. You know, I talked about being trained in the Western art model. And I think that was important to do that because I think most artists who call themselves experimental artists, they need to learn what the rules are before they can break them, right? That's the whole point, is how to push that boundary. But when it comes to going back to a culture that is non-Western, there are no limits to push except just respect and love and care for each other and discussion. That's what I find. I found, and in the film when you saw it, you see kind of in the frame people, and you see like the hands, and that green net is actually a fly screen. A fly screen that, you know, to keep the flies out in the building. And so it's like, how are we going to catch the sperm, the eggs? Let's get this fly screen that's no longer used and put it in the water and scoop them up and have a look. It was that fun and ridiculous. And I'm there with my camera going, oh my gosh, they're so like amazing. We're in the water with it. You know, it was this joyful experience. And then coming back to Sydney and talking to my friend who's Indonesian, Michael, and I talked about it, and we talked about how, and we researched it. We looked like, what is this coral spawning phenomena that happens? And we saw that it goes all the way, you know, what is called the Ring of Fire. There's this like volcanic activity. But of course, it's all to do with connected to the trenches and the underneath of the earth, and that's, you know, when you're standing in the reef and feeling the reef regenerate, you're just like, wow, I'm part of something that makes you feel very insignificant, like the ant in John Pulle's story. No, but that was a good question. Thank you. I went on a bit, but. Yeah, cool.
You could keep going if you want.
I think I do better with discussions. Yeah.
Hi, Taloi. I'm just thinking of like this, maybe this new current of thinking about the oceanic space, Pacific Islands, this our region as a space of critical thought or global relevance now. And you just curated something called Ocean Space in Venice, in that kind of put us in this Eurocentric space. And I don't know, I felt that was really from a distance, like witnessing our family in that space, reclaiming those spaces, almost like disregarding its value and reasserting our value of practice and familial connection and oceanic connection as well. I was wondering if you could speak about, the criticalness of Oceania and maybe a little bit about oceanic space as well.
Yeah. So I think the question, thinking about Oceania as a critical space, right? Yeah. Absolutely. My role during working in Europe, Venice, Italy, was to bring, my role was to facilitate maybe a beginning of that, entering into that critical space, is to bring in two strong voices, Latai Taumaupiau and Elisa Peta Hinamoa Heta, and both brought in their communities. So it's this flow-on effect of talking about issues such as deep-sea mining, and about the sacredness of our stories of our belonging, our place. And so that was called restoring Oceania, you know. In a way, is to reframe. It is a critical space, and I think when I read the tales of John Poulet, it goes back. That book was written in the 80s, and it's so present. Some of these issues that come up, you know, around tourism, militarism, you know, all these external forces. But what about the communities, you know, themselves? And yeah, it's certainly become, and it will become even more so, I feel and believe, because the world is so full of water, and we're feeling that rise in the sea levels, and we're feeling it. Yeah, I mean, if we talk about all areas of the Pacific and Oceania, there isn't one area that isn't got its issues. You know, the environmental, the unpredictability, but there's also some beautiful connections that are made with our ancient trade routes and our relationships with each other. And I think if I could sort of help instigate one idea, it would be to open those up again, those relationalities. Yeah. But how do you feel about it as a critical space? I think it's an exciting space too, I believe. Yeah. I say that because there is a lot of attention, for good or for bad, but there's attention now, and I think, you know, that's why I read these stories today and talked about that.
Yeah, I think outside I realize that people have an imagined idea of the Pacific, or an idea that's not of relationship to land, and that these islands feel like spots or like specks, and there's so much romanticism around the Pacific, and then you go into like this microness of it, and it becomes this macro idea of political resistance and such. I don't know, I feel like our oceanic folks and cousins have been at the forefront of climate change, and have also been feeling it the worst, you know, and it's like Vanuatu is the most at-risk island in the world, and after that it's Kiribati, and then after that it's the Philippines. So it's like we have there's a vulnerability that I think it's starting to like encroach on the rest of the world, and people are having to like deal with that reality. But there's so much, I don't know, like what you brought today and what you brought in your rituals, not going to say practice, is that embodiment of that embodiment, the relationality that's missing in the idea or the dreaming of Pacific. And I think that it's like sooner or later we're all going to have to be in a physical relationship to the ocean, because there will be no more dreaming of its distance. It's going to be at our doorsteps.
Totally. No, I thank you. I firmly believe that, and you know, I grew up thinking about like, I've come from this island, and then this island, and then this island, but we're different because there's so many different languages, you know. And then my father would say, no, you know, and he was gendered. No man is an island. We're all. And he sort of changed my thinking from early if you're from an archipelago, from an island, your view is actually expansive, and it's actually very inclusive, no borders. It's connective, what we were talking about yesterday, connective tissues. And
I don't know if I have I have a lot of questions, but I feel like we need to wrap it up. But I just want to say thank you so much for being here. You really delivered, all of you today delivered the purpose of the auditorium, which is shifting how we share space together and shifting how we understand knowledge from the 21st century. It's no longer you're on the stage, you're on, you're sitting on a mat and sharing stories and storytelling with all of us. I think that is a form that we all have to unlearn of how, how even just the performative aspect of how knowledge is being delivered and what is being valued. I think all of that has to become with the unlearning that we have been doing from the more kind of a written format to the oral history to these kind of collective embodied experience. After we opened the project, we realized so many people living in Shanghai doesn't have an embodied connection with water, not to mention the Pacific Ocean. A lot of people don't even know how to swim. It's not the case, I will say, maybe 200 years ago, but it is the case now. Not too far from us, there's fishing villages. There's a lot of farming happening just an hour away. But we kind of chose not to feel it, experience it, or acknowledge it. So I think I'm really grateful for all of you bring a completely different but vital, critical knowledge and experience into our space. And this is just, we're literally breaking the wave. We're not even there yet, but really hope that this journey will continue and we will continuously to bring a very different aspect of life into our program. So thank you so much for being here.